Hello, I'm Dr. Divyang Pathak, pediatrician and pediatric intensivist from Vatsalya Children's Hospital in Varanasi. Today, my topic is on invasive monitoring. So, we'll be focusing on invasive arterial monitoring today. Okay. So, invasive arterial pressure monitoring. So, basically, we'll be discussing every aspects of invasive monitoring in artery, from basics to the practical things to the application in PICU. So intra-arterial blood pressure monitoring, that is IBP measurement, is often or considered is it is the gold standard of the blood pressure monitoring system. Despite its increased risk, cost, and need for technical expertise for placement and management, its utility in providing crucial and timely information outweighs its risk in many cases. So it's kind of very important if you are managing a sick child, if you can manage the risk and cost of the arterial line, for which you need to have a good staff. So indication for arterial cannulation is continuous real-time blood pressure monitoring, a planned pharmacological or mechanical cardiovascular manipulations, repeated blood sampling, mostly AVGs, and failure of indirect arterial blood pressure measurement, burns or obesity, or in severe shock also, the non-invasive BP monitoring is inaccurate most of the time. So supplementary diagnostic information from the arterial waveform, which we will learn forward. So the basic principle is the pressure waveform of the arterial pulse is transmitted via the column of the fluid to the pressure transducer, where it is converted into an electrical signal. So the pressure waveform from arterial pulse is transferred through a fluid to a sensor, which convert into an electrical pulse, and which we see in the monitor. This electrical pulse is thus processed and amplified and converted into visual display by a microprocessor. The radial artery is the most common site for invasive blood pressure monitoring. But before that, we have to do a modified Allen test, which we all know which is necessary whenever if we are doing any prick on radial artery or ulnar artery. So this is a kind of a pictorial. I'll describe it. First, you have to palpate the pulse. If we are here, we are cannulating the radial artery. You have to palpate the pulse with the other hand. From the main hand, you have to identify or visualize the radial artery as a straight line, and just proximal of the palpation of your hand, you have to prick at 45 degree. And as you prick, you just turn the needle slightly downwards to 30 degrees so that you can progress it forward. As the blood comes in your cannula, as we do in venous cannulation, we pull out the stellate slightly and slowly insert the catheter inside the arterial, and after inserting, we just pull out the stellate totally, and the arterial line is inserted. It's mostly simple as a venous cannulation. Just the technique, initial prick is important. So transfixation technique are there. There are two type of technique. Here we can see that some people prefer, they go deeply penetrated and cutting through the arterial line, both wall, and when they withdraw, then they see the blood coming out. Or they gently go and just whenever they prick, they just withdraw the stellate and go in. So in my preference, the second method is very useful, in that the risk of hematoma is less dangerous. You can always use ultrasonographic imaging, whether it is radial artery or it is femoral artery, or there are many other artery also. If there is any, especially in the cases of shock where we cannot palpate the pulse very good, or if there is a patient is in cyanotic heart disease where the color of um, the blood is not very clear as an arterial blood. So for the confirmation, use ultrasonographic imaging to identify the arterial blood. Artery is just identified as a pulsating artery, and you can use compressive effect to identify the artery. The artery will not compress very easily than in compared to veins. So alternative arterial pressure monitoring sites are ulnar, brachial, axillary, femoral, and dorsalis pedis. In femoral, we use Seldigen technique as we use in central line, but when other ulnar, brachial, and axillary and dorsal pedis technique is simple as transfixation technique, which we use in venous cannulation also. The most we have to get to learn that arterial pressure monitoring is good, but it is associated with a lot of risk if not very good monitored and handled very well. So the complications are hemorrhage, that is very massive and very common. So if there is any leakage or any breakage of the or any discontinuation of any of the port, the massive bleeding will take in, and it will create a chaos in the PIC. And rather than hemorrhage, there's misinterpretation of data. The ischemia can be there if the other parallel artery is not working, pseudoaneurysm. Now these are the rare complication. Arterial embolization can be there if you push air or other fluids, like if you start fluids or antibiotic in the arterial cannula. AV fistula infection is very common, and peripheral neuropathy can also be there. So be cautious for this. So these are the things, like in artery you can cause dissection. Total occlusion of the artery should also be not there. You should find the right size of the arterial line, and there can be tear of the artery, thrombus can be formed, spasm can be there, or hematoma can be there. These are the common complications. Now the physical principle. Now see, it is it is actually a physics. Now we are changing a wave into an electrical signal. So pulse is also a kind of wave. So wave is a disturbance that travels through a medium, transferring energy but not matter. One of the simplest form is sine wave, which we know that. But in artery, the arterial waveform is not clearly seen as a simple sine wave. There are multiple waves because there are reverberations in the tubes which we connect through the arterial line. There are many reverberations, and there are many reverberations in the body also through because of when the blood flows forward, it strikes to the branches of the arteries. The waves come back. So there are multiple waves. So there are summation of multiple waves, and the summation of the multiple waves causes a specific kind of wave, which we see on the monitor. That is called a peculiar arterial wave. The basis is Fourier analysis, which transducer and microprocessor does for us. Kindly, I request all you to mute your mics. So the properties is natural frequency and dampening coefficient. So in natural frequency of the system determines how rapidly the system oscillates from a stimulus. So natural frequency is the frequency of the system. how rapidly it oscillates. And dampening coefficient is the friction. Now, natural frequency is the system, the characteristic of the basic characteristic of the whatever material it is, and dampening coefficient is the frictional forces which we encounter during the flow of the fluid or flow of the waves, which determine how the rest of the stimulus we get to the microprocessor. So these two frequencies or the characteristics determine how the waves is formed. So natural frequency, it is important that the IBP system has a very high natural frequency, at least 8 times the fundamental frequency of an arterial waveform. Because arterial waveform, actually the arterial waveform is very, the real wave which is created is very small. So we have to amplitude that. So at least 8 times it has to be amplituded so that we can see good electrical analysis in the monitor. So 8 times the fundamental frequency on the arterial waveform, the frequency should be more. Therefore, for a system to remain accurate at heart rate of up to 180 BPM, its frequency must be at least 180 BPM into 8. That is 24 Hertz. It's just for theory. So natural frequency is increased by reducing the length of the cannula or tubing. Now these points are very important because these determine why we choose a specific type of cannula or tubings for arterial waveform or pressure monitoring. It reduces it increased by reducing the length of the cannula or tubing, reducing the compliance of the cannula or diaphragm of the tubes, reducing the density of the fluid using in the tubing, increasing the diameter of the cannula or tubing. So commercially available system generally have 200 Hertz, so we don't have to worry about that. These are more hard, non-compliant and small diameter. And then we generally used to have for infusion of the drugs. The other pressure monitoring system tubings are different from that. Now, coming to the dampening, this is very important to know and understand. Now, anything that reduces the energy in the oscillating system will reduce the amplitude of the oscillation. That is dampening. Dampening means the reduction in the amplitude of the oscillation. Okay, so some degree of dampening is required in all systems, which is called critical dampening. Otherwise, the analysis will come haywire, or too much of reverberations will be there. So some amount of dampening is required. But out of that, if it is excessive, then it is over dampened, or it is insufficient, then it is under dampened. The output will be adversely affected. Now, in this diagram, we'll see. Now, there's one basic principle: whether the arterial line is over dampened or under dampened, the mean pressure will mostly will be equal or the same. So the mean pressure will not change. The systolic and diastolic will change. Now, there is too much of variation, too much of upgoing and too much of downgoing. So this is under dampened because the amplitude is not reduced, it is kind of increased. So this is under dampened. Now here you can see according to this, in comparison of this, the amplitude is very less. Okay, so this is over dampened waveform. We'll go in detail just to have a glimpse that what is over dampened and under dampened. If you see very shallow waves, then it is most probably over dampened. If you see very sharp waves, high waves, it is under dampened. But the mean pressure remains same. Now here we can see that this is a normal arterial waveform, normal non-distorted arterial waveform. Okay. Now we'll come in detail what is the arterial waveform. Just to see what this is an arterial waveform. Now, if there is a over spike of systolic and down spike of diastolic. Now this is underdampened arterial blood pressure. In underdampened arterial blood pressure waveform, there is over spiking of systolic pressure and under spiking of diastolic pressure. There can be many reverberations. These are non-physiological reverberations during the diastolic phase, and I'll come to that in more detail rather. And there is one dicrotic notch. And in underdampened, as you see, this is the normal arterial waveform, but the amplitude is reduced and there is no dicrotic notch. So by this there is decrease in systolic and increase in diastolic line. So this is kind of a over dampened wavelength or waveform. So we'll come forward and we'll come in detail. Factors that cause over dampening include friction in the fluid. Whenever there is a friction or there is an obstruction, then whenever there is a friction in the fluid pathway, there is over dampening. The three-way taps can cause a small bubble or small clots can cause over or large bubble or large clots can cause over dampening. Vasospasm can cause narrowing, and long and compliant tubing can cause over dampening, or kinks can cause over dampening because in these cases the proper waveforms are not transmitted to the transducer. So what do we do? There is a fast flush test to see to check whether how do we know the waveform what we are seeing, it is underdampened or overdampened. Now there is a method called fast flush test. Now it provides a convenient bedside method for determining the dynamic response of the system. The natural frequency is inversely proportional to the time between the adjacent oscillation peaks, and the dampening coefficient can be calculated mathematically also, but it is usually determined graphically from the amplitude ratio. I'll go in detail. So in simple language, now whenever we have a confusion that whether the waveforms are, if this waveform is normal or not, or this waveform is normal or not, or this waveform is normal or not, we have to check for the dampening. So for that, you have to flush the system through the fluid. Now these technicalities, how to flush, how to connect, what is the specific waveform, what are the characteristics, what it depicts will come forward and we'll learn about that. I'll just tell the terms that we just flush the system through fluids which is connected in the system. We observe, because we flush it, the pressure goes totally up. Now as the pressure goes totally up, we hold it keeps for some time, and then we just release it. And after releasing, we have to count the oscillations till the normal waveform comes. Now this oscillation have a characteristic value. Now if the oscillation is 1 to 2 oscillations before returning or to the normal tracing, then the values are mostly accurate. Now the first oscillation is this upstroke, then the second oscillation is this downstroke. Okay, this is 1 and 1, then second. So 1, and generally we say that 1.5 is the ideal. Now this is 1 and the second. Now if you see, it is underdampened, that is the waves are too much spiked. Now the reverberations or the oscillations will be too much. It will be more than 2. This is 1, 2, 3. Then it comes to the normal. Okay, so more than 2 oscillations, that causes tells that overestimation of the systolic pressure or diastolic pressures may be underestimated. That is underdamped. But if we see it is overdampened, the system is very much dampened, then the oscillations will not be much. You can see there's only slight here or there's not even one complete oscillation. One complete oscillation must be like this, but it's not even completing one oscillation. So less than one oscillation, it is overdampened. Now here, now we can see this here this normal. This is under dampened. Now after fast flush test, we can see the reverberations. Now this is what we see in the monitor. Now these are the waveforms after doing the fast flush test. You see too much of waves, which is more than 2, then it is under dampened. If it is just 1.5, this is 1.5, that is normal. And if it is not below than 1.5, then it is over dampened. Okay, and over dampened, there is absence of diachrotic notch. So till now we have understand that the how to determine the dampening of the waveform, which is very important because it happens very frequently in the waveform, because by the dampening you have to directly correlate the BP of the, by the waveforms you have to directly correlate the BP of the child. So you have to be very sure that the waveforms are not distorted, and you have to take care of dampening or over dampening or under dampening. So like this is the first waveform, this is the second waveform, and this is the first amplitude and the second amplitude. By dividing that amplitude, we get the amplitude ratio, and there is a chart of a dampening coefficient. So this is a mathematical calculation for the dampening coefficient, but practically we I don't think anybody use this dampening coefficient, because by seeing the reverberations we can tell it is over dampened or under dampened. So this was the easy method to remember. Okay, for this you have many articles, you can go in detail for this. So now what is the component of IBP measuring system? So there is an arterial line inserted in the artery. Now there is a saline filled non-compressible tubing. Now this tubing characteristics, as I defined, was very necessary for having a good natural frequency. It is non-compressible saline filled tubings. Now this is where the transducer is attached. There is a 3-way, okay, and this transducer is attached to the monitor where we can see the waveform, and this saline is coming from a saline source which is under the pressure, so that continuous saline force can be there. Otherwise blood will come out from here, and if there is no sufficient force, this can be done by this or the infusion pump, both can be used. Now here there is a 3-way, there is the importance of 3-way here. Now these are the component intra-arterial cannula. There are different type of intra-arterial cannula. In small kids, we can use normal cannula, which is venous cannulas, or in the large adolescents, we can use proper arterial cannula, where we have a stellate inside, proper stellate, proper needle, and then the catheter. Now the other component is fluid filled tubing, which is non-compliant, small in diameter, hard, and that is specific for pressure monitoring systems. Now this is a transducer. You can see that there is a 3-way and a transducer attached. Now there is a diaphragm also here, which catch the pulse of the pulse which is traveling through the saline, and catch here the diaphragm, which is converted into the electrical activity from Fourier analysis and transmitted to the these monitors. So they are 3-way and a transducer. Now infusion plus system is also there, which I initially told. We can use a pressure system to give a saline, or you can use an infusion pump also. Now there is a signal processor, amplifier, and display, which was a transducer. Now these were the components, but before starting the arterial line, we have to ensure that we have to zero to the atmospheric pressure. Otherwise the whatever the pressure we'll see in the monitor will be not the accurate pressure if we doesn't correlate it with the atmospheric pressure. So that is called leveling and zeroing. That is done by leveling and zeroing. Zeroing, for a pressure transducer to read accurately, atmospheric pressure must be discontinued from the pressure system. This is done by exposing the transducer to the atmospheric pressure and calibrating the pressure reading to zero. So there are two steps. First, you have to level that. We'll come to the leveling part. We have to level at the right position. Then we have to expose the system to the atmosphere so that the transducer get an atmospheric pressure, and then we have to zero it so that atmospheric pressure is cancelled. Okay. The level of transducer is not important at this point of time, but when it is zeroed, then we have to level it. Now zeroing. Now you can see there is a three-way. Now here the transducer, the one line is going towards the arterial system, other line is going towards the infusion pump. This is closed. Okay. If we open this and we have to remove the cork, and we have to flush the system, flush the saline from this port to the outside of the air, and then close it, and then zero it and close it. Then atmospheric pressure comes to be zero. Now this is the technique we have to learn, we have to do before zeroing. We have to expose the system to the atmospheric pressure by opening the valve to the atmosphere, so that this is the open port and you flush some 1 to 2 drops of air from this so that it is exposed to the atmosphere. Then you close it. Now then you have to level it. Now leveling is also very important. The pressure transducer must be set at the appropriate level in relation to the patient in order to measure the blood pressure correctly. Now, as you know, the pressure is gravity also plays a role in the pressure if we calculate the pressure at different level. Now this is usually taken to be level with the patient heart, because we are measuring the blood pressure. So the sole point is the center point of the heart, which is the point at which the leveling has to be done, at which the transducer or the three-way has to be put so that it is in continuous with the line of horizontally positioned to the line of heart directly. Now this is usually taken at the fourth intercostal space in the mid-axillary line. This is the surface marking, or at this part you can see that the in this position there is a heart. If the transducer is too low, it overreads. If the transducer is too high, it underreads. Now here we can see that this is the heart, this is the level. Okay. So actually this is the phlebostatic level. This level is called as a phlebostatic level. So the transducer should be here. If the transducer is up, for every inch the transducer is above the mid chest level, the displayed intravascular or intracardiac pressure will be about 2 mmHg less. If we go up, it will show less. If we go down, it will show more. So we have to this zero level should be at this point of heart, that is the phlebostatic level. Okay. So normal, now we'll go in detail with the arterial pressure waveform in detail. So the systolic waveform component consists of steep pressure upslope, a peak, ensuing then a decline and immediate follow from the ECG R wave. The downslope of the arterial pressure waveform is interrupted by the dicrotic notch, continues, it declines during the diastole after the ECG T wave and reaches its nadir at the end diastole. So now at this point, there is a R, it coincides with the R wave of ECG. The contraction has, signal for contraction has been there. Now this is the delay, where the interval of R wave and the upstroke of systole. Now this is the delay, which is the delay between the nerves and the contraction, actual contraction of the heart. Now when the actual contraction of the heart occurs, there is some millisecond also takes to travel at the point which you are measuring the pressure. So this is a delay. So this is the upstroke when there is a contraction. Now this up and the highest point is the systolic pressure. Now it slowly goes down, and this is the dicrotic notch. Okay, this is the systolic and decline. Then is a dicrotic notch. Then there is slowing or diastolic runoff. When the ventricle dilates, there is a diastolic runoff. Okay, so this is the in general term, the till the dicrotic notch, it is the systole, and from the dicrotic notch, it is the diastole. So dicrotic notch is the last part of the systole when the valve closes in the heart. Now here, this is the anacrotic limb, and this is the dicrotic limb. Now this steep downflow is called diastolic runoff, and this end point is the end diastolic pressure. This is the diastolic pressure. So this up point is the systolic pressure. This down point is the diastolic pressure. But if you see that if you are asked to draw a waveform, then you put this as a X and Y axis. Now you always draw a line above the baseline. This point should not touch this point, because this is the zero pressure. Now this is the diastolic pressure. So diastolic pressure is 80 here. Okay, and the up point is 120. That is the systolic pressure. So in graph, it is always above the baseline. So this is, and the area under the curve, it is the map. Area under the total area under the curve till the baseline of the graph is the map, that is mean arterial pressure. Okay. Now what is this between systolic pressure minus diastolic pressure? That is the pulse pressure. So the pressure from here to here, it is the pulse pressure. From here to here, it is systolic pressure. From here to here, it is diastolic pressure. So this has to be very, very, very clear that from here to here, it is diastolic. From here to baseline, it is systolic. But in between the difference, it is the pulse pressure. So here, this is the anacrotic limb. This is the systolic peak. This is the dicrotic limb. As the blood continues into the peripheral vessels, the arterial pressure falls and the waveform becomes a downtrend and called the dicrotic limb. The arterial pressure usually keeps falling until pressure is in the ventricle is less than the pressure of the aortic root. And dicrotic notch, when ventricular pressure is lower than the aortic root pressure, the aortic valve is closed. Now, when aortic valve is closed, there is a dip in the pressure or a reverse flow in the arterial system. If you can imagine, if you are sitting in the aorta at the aortic root, when the aortic valve closes, then there will be slight backflow of the blood flow. That will decrease, the slight pressure decrease will be there. Now that causes the dicrotic notch. Okay. Then there is an end diastole where total filling has been done. Now, as the pressure wave travels from central aorta to the periphery, so there can be two. If you insert a catheter in the aorta, or if you insert a catheter into a periphery like radial artery or dorsalis pedis artery, the waveforms are different. The arterial upstroke becomes steeper going to periphery. The systolic peak increases. The diagrotic notch appears later. The diastolic wave becomes more prominent and end diastolic pressure decreases. So this is the aortic arch. So this is the closest to the heart. Okay, that why the diagrotic notch is very clear, because most of the backflow at the time of aortic valve closure is seen here. So this is the diagrotic notch, which is very prominent, and this slight slowing, and it comes earlier. But if we come more towards the femoral artery, it becomes more steeper. There is lessen of diastolic notch, diagrotic notch, and there is a slight runoff. It is the diagrotic notch. Actually, this is the diagrotic notch, and this is the runoff. So the diagrotic notch is very much deepened and slower. Now see, from the aortic root, subclavian artery, axillary artery, brachial artery, radial artery, femoral artery. The diagrotic notch is moving forward. The peak of systole is going upward. The slope of the diastole is going more steeper. Now this is the characteristic feature we use. We should know that what is the difference if we measure a arterial waveform close to the heart or away from the heart. So what is the mechanism? So when the stroke volume is there is a aortic compliance also, which causes some reverberations. There is a forward flow because of aortic compliance. Some reverberations in the artery also comes. Now at this point where the artery bifurcate, or obviously the pulse wave is flowing here, the blood will go there, but because of the obstruction there will be a reflection of the wave up in the opposite side. So this reflection is also noted. Now if there are too many reflection, if the arteries are too rigid, then the reverberations will be more. If they are too compliant, the reverberations will be less. So peripheral amplification of the pulse wave is because the peripheral arteries are more stiff than the main arteries. Okay, so there is steeper, the systolic is more and diastolic is less. So these are the reason, because I already explained about the diastolic and diacritic notch, because here when the valve closes there will be slight black flow at that time, and that time diacritic notch will be there. Okay, so this is the diacritic notch, and from here diacritic notch will not be there, and the peripheries will not see that. So there is a forward flow. So in summed up, if you'll see there, I just told that there are many waves. After summing up, we get a proper arterial wave. So how can we differentiate that what waves are what? So actually this is the forward flow, this much point. Initial steep flow is a forward flow. Now this is the reflected wave. The reflected wave, this is the augmented pressure because of the reflection. Okay. Then there is a runoff, diastolic notch, and then there is a runoff because there is a diastole, and the blood flow, the speed of flow also decreases, the pressure decreases. Okay. Those summited, forward, and reflected wave in a settled area of a stiff aorta. So in stiff aorta, if you can see these specific waves also. So in general, for a layman, if it is closer to the heart, if it is away from the heart, the arterial stiffness increases, the pressure wave reflection, the higher the systolic blood pressure in ankles than in arms. Okay. Now, arterial blood pressure gradients. The nature of the operative procedure is important when choosing the right appropriate site, like uh, coarctation of aorta or thoracic abdominal surgeries or pulmonary bypass. These are the more complicated things. We'll go in abnormal. Now we have learned about the normal waveform. Now we'll see what are the abnormal arterial waveforms. The morphologic features of individual arterial pressure waveform can provide important diagnostic information. So you can see by just seeing the waveform, you can diagnose many things in a patient. So in aortic stenosis, there is pulsus parvus, that is narrow pulse pressure, or pulsus tardus, delayed upstroke, aortic regurgitation, uh, pulsus bifringens, double peak, hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, spike and dome in mid systolic obstruction, systolic left ventricular pressure, pulsus alternans, and cardiac tamponade, pulsus paradoxus. So here we can see that if pulsus bigeminis, now here two type of pulse we can see. These are the pulsus bigeminis. The amplitude and rhythm varies every other beat, weak and irregular. This we can see in arrhythmias or PVCs. We can see there is one high, one low. So this is bigeminal pulse. So if we can see that in arrhythmias. Pulses corrigans, this water hammer pulse, we can see in strong stroke volume. If there is strong stroke volume, the upstroke will be very strong. So diagrotic notch will be much lower. So this strong, this upstroke shows that there is bounding pulse or there is a high stroke volume, which we can correlate with anemia, aortic regurgitation, PDA, thyrotoxicosis. These are the common causes. Now, fast upstroke, if there is a very fast upstroke, then it is quite common that very quick ejection fraction is there. Now, quick rise and sharp systolic blood pressure. Okay, that can be in mitral regurgitation or aortic regurgitation. Or systemic disease like anemia, if there are stiff arteries, arteriosclerosis or thyrotoxicosis. In slow upstroke, very slow upstroke is there. That is due to slow ventricular ejection, that is aortic stenosis, okay, or CHF, or very low stroke volume. So the blood will go very slow. Here blood will go very fast. Now the dichrotic notch, if it is very delayed, then it suggests the cardiac output is decreased. So dichrotic notch less than 1/3 of the peak of the systolic notch, that is very down to this less than 1/3, then the cardiac output is reduced, because the cardiac output is not much, so that it can put pressure on aortic valve, and aortic valve reflection would not be very good, and it will be delayed, and this will suggest with decreased cardiac output. So in these scenarios, you can identify some abnormal conditions by only seeing the arterial waveforms. Now the waveform analysis for prediction of intravascular volume responsiveness. Now this is one of the most important use of intra-arterial waveform during the pediatric intensive care. Now the variation in arterial blood pressure observed during positive pressure ventilation, as well as a variety of derived indices, are the most widely studied of these dynamic indicators. So they result from change in interthoracic pressure and lung volume that occur during the respiratory cycle. Okay, so in positive pressure ventilation, there is a reverse from the spontaneous breathing. In spontaneous breathing, as we can see, in spontaneous breathing, the pressure or the systolic pressure goes down. But in positive pressure ventilation, the systolic pressure or the blood pressure will go up. Okay. Now that physiology I am not going to detail. Now you can see that this is the pressure waveform of a ventilator, peculiar pressure controlled ventilation. Now when the pressure is released, there is a increase in BP. The waveform changes, goes up. Now how do we determine that there is a fluid responsiveness or not? If we draw in apnea, there will be a continuous waveform which will form the baseline or at the peak of the systolic. Now this baseline line will be drawn. The amount of systolic peak going up and the systolic peak going down during the expiration, this variation determines whether it is fluid responsive or not. So that is delta up and delta down. So this is during expiration, this is during inspiration. So in real scenario, you will see like this picture. Okay, so you will draw a baseline. Now how you draw a baseline in a one thing is eyeballing by right up. If you see these kind of waveforms and the child is paralyzed or having a spontaneous breathing, then also there are too much of variations. You just by blind eye you can see that the child is fluid responsive. But if you want to take it very accurately, you have to take a printout of the waveform, then you have to analyze it and draw a line and then see how much downstroke and how much upstroke is there. Then you have to calculate it. So there are two methods, that is systolic volume variation and pulse pressure volume variation. These are the two methods by which we see the hemodynamic variation. The pulse pressure variation, this is the pulse pressure. So here we see the pulse pressure variation. The pulse pressure is also reduced. Here the pulse pressure is more. So we have to calculate the pulse pressure and then we calculate how much percentage it is. Okay. And systolic pressure, here we draw a line from upmost and the downmost and the baseline. Now you get the upstroke and the downstroke and we divide it with upstroke and downstroke and you get a number. So this is the assessment of systolic pressure, stroke volume variation, stroke volume variation and the pulse pressure variation. Now the pulse pressure variation calculation will be done by PP max minus PP minimum by PP mean. Whenever there is a variation word, the denominator is always mean. In IVC calculation in USG also you have distensibility, you have variability, you have collapsibility. So when the denominator is mean, you mean that you are talking about variation. Okay. So when there is pulse pressure variation, you have to take the maximum pulse pressure, the minimum pulse pressure, and divide it by the mean pulse pressure. The pulse pressure variation will be there. The pulse pressure variation around 15 to 18%, more than 15 to 18%, or 12 to 15% is considered as a positive for fluid responsiveness, that the patient should maybe fluid responsive. Okay. So there are some criteria for having pulse pressure variation. To calculate this, the pulse pressure more than 12% is suggested that there will be an increase in stroke volume with fluid change, that is fluid responsiveness. There are three conditions which have to be met, which is very important. There has to be a sinus rhythm. The patient should be mechanically ventilated without spontaneous respiration. The tidal volume should be at least 8 ml per kg and must not have open chest. So these three are the must criteria to see the pulse pressure variation in a patient which is ventilated. In contrast to an increase in BP with respiration causing high pulse pressure variation, pulsus paradoxus is the decreased in systolic blood pressure more than 10, which is associated in tamponade and other conditions. So if you see that in positive pressure, the BP is going down, then suspect tamponade. if it is going up, then suspect fluid responsiveness. And there are much more differentials which we have learned. And I hope you got that. These are the different method by which we can see the arterial waveforms. That is, first method is standard deviation of arterial pulse around the mean pulse pressure. Then there is LIDCO. Then there is PICO. I'll not go into details of these things. These are maybe out of the scope of pulmonology. So thank you for the presentation. I'm open for the questions.
I think the way you have gone through all the slides in the calm and composed way of showcasing what blood gas analysis and arterial line analysis is, I don't think anybody would be having any questions. Good work done, Dr. Divyak.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. So if anybody has any question or any simple